Hello and welcome to Grow Big Red. I'm John Fesch with Nebraska Extension, and today we're going to talk about caring for newly planted trees. You know, you spend money and time and effort putting the trees in the ground, and it's always good to plant for the next year and coming future generations. It's always a very laudable thing, but the time and energy is just the beginning, and it's really one of those things that needs to be cared for just like any other aspect of life, whether it be your air conditioning system or your heating, your HVAC system. People are thinking about getting that ready for the long cold winter ahead. Or for a car, you buy a car and then it needs regular maintenance as time goes on. So those are one of those examples, and maybe you're a little bit more familiar with those kinds of things because they're every day all the time. But unless you've planted a tree recently, you may not have thought about all the things that need to be taken care of and need to be attended to with the tree. We're going to start off by just looking at a situation where you might have this and you might not, but if you do, you want to take care of it. And we're going to look at the foliage of the tree and just examine what's going on in the branch structure as well. Now, when you're viewing this video and this television program, the particular tree you're looking at or the shrub that you're looking at might or might not have leaves on it. And in fact, if the leaves are gone, that's going to be more helpful to see what's going on. So I'm going to point out several things here with it. First of all, there's the fruit. This happens to be a Japanese tree lilac, which is kind of a smaller tree, maybe a good one for a front yard because it only gets about 20 feet tall. And right now what you're looking at is foliage. You're looking at a bunch of leaves. You're also looking at seeds that have developed from some flowers. Well, going into the winter, the seeds really don't do us much good. And so generally what you would do, especially if the tree is small, is just clip those off. And you don't really want those on the tree any longer. And you could even do that in the summer after they bloom. Now eventually the tree is going to get to be too big and you're not going to be able to do that, but it's one of those things where removal is a good idea. The second thing would be looking for anything broken. And I happened to choose this one because this branch was broken when I went to pick it out for today's filming session. And that's something you're going to look for there is if something is broken, then that's a good idea. It's a good target for removal. So we're going to go ahead and just remove this back to the area where it joins another branch. And I think we can get a little bit closer on that. What we're going to do is cut it off at that point. So right about here, I'll turn it this way. I think that'll work for you. And we'll cut it back to that point. And that'll make a nice clean cut and it'll preserve the integrity of the tree. Now just below where I made that cut, you see a little bit of a dead area. And that dead area is something that also should be removed because if in fact that becomes infected with some decay organisms, that's going to spread throughout the rest of the tree. So we'll make a nice clean cut on that as well. That's all it needs to be done. You don't want to take out a lot of other growth because the tree needs every leaf it can have heading into the fall to make carbohydrates and sugars for the root system and for the rest of the tree. You want those roots to get off to a good shape, and they're only going to be able to do that if they are fed by the natural food-making organisms of the tree, and that is the chloroplasts inside the leaves. You really don't feed trees. Trees make their own food from the natural photosynthesis process, the respiration that goes on in a tree. Occasionally you might need to add nutrients just to help that process along, but trees really make their own food. And really at this point it's all about cleaning up any mistakes that have happened or any blows that Mother Nature has dealt us. And really it's also about grooming the tree just a little bit. Another reason why you might want to take off the blooming parts of the tree would be that sometimes these can get a little weighty and they might bend the branches down. That probably weighs about a pound. And in a windstorm it might kind of thrash around a little bit and that might cause a bit of a problem. And once the tree gets some size to it, that's really no longer an important thing, so we don't need to worry about that. So really it's a matter of cleaning up broken branches and dead pieces. Here's another little dead piece that you would want to take out. And just kind of a grooming and a natural sanitation for the tree itself. So that's the first consideration, is just giving the tree a good look-see and seeing what we have in terms of what's going on there. The next thing that you want to think about when it comes to caring for newly planted trees and shrubs would be to make sure that the soil around the tree, in the root system, in the root ball, and then also out 4 or 5 feet in all directions, has the proper moisture level. And that we're going to be looking for moist, not soggy and not dry. And this, of course, can be done a number of ways. The key element is whether you put it on by hand with a device like this, or you water the whole area. If you've put in several trees and you want to water the whole area, something like this might be a little bit more appropriate. Or even something like this. This is a soaker hose, and this is something you can attach to your outdoor water spigot and just run along a single line. A lot of times we have a kind of a line of newly planted trees. And this works really well because it doesn't spray the water in the air like this device does. It just kind of weeps and seeps out, and the water is delivered very slowly but very consistently in a very, a very low evaporation kind of method. So it works out really well. And so something like this works out really well for that. Now, none of these devices you would want to leave hooked up over the winter. Once we get into Thanksgiving time frame, you want to make sure those are disconnected from the outdoor spigot and they're wrapped up and just hung up in your garage over the winter. So that's important. And again, you may also want to use something like this on a very small tree. The key is going to be really making sure that this particular plant has the right amount of water in it as it goes through the winter. And again, I've talked about this before when it comes time to make sure that your lawn has the right amount of water in it. Well, the same device, this low-tech screwdriver, is the best type of tool to use to make sure that the lawn and, of course, in this case, the newly planted tree or shrub, has the right amount of water in it. And it's a simple method. You just push this into the ground and then pull it out, and kind of like Little Jack Horner in the fairy tale, you're just going to feel the end of this screwdriver shaft and see if it feels cool and moist. And maybe a little bit of mud might stick to it. That's what you're really looking for. If it's dry and hard to push in the ground, that's going to be meaning that the soil is too dry. If it goes in real easy like quicksand and it makes a little bit of a sloshing sound, you pull it out and it's dripping water, that means you've kind of overdone it and it's time to back off for a week or so on keeping them moist. On average, that's kind of about for a newly planted tree, a week to 10-day interval in terms of a good soaking is kind of a target to shoot for. But of course, that can vary a little bit from site to site and from tree to tree. So again, that moniker or that theme of moist, but not soggy and not dry, will go a long way to help you really determine just how much water to put on the tree. And really, it's best not to spray everywhere. That's why I like this device, because it waters only at the roots and minimal amounts of evaporation. And even something like this, you can direct down just towards the roots of the tree. And again, if this was the planting hole of the tree, something about this size, you'd want to water an area about 3 times that size because the new roots are trying to establish outward, and you want to make sure that that new soil, that recently disturbed soil, is loose enough to be able to absorb that water. And it's not going to just get right in this area. If we just water this area, those newly expanding roots won't get any water. They'll only get natural rainfall. So in order to make sure that happens, it's probably good to triple that size in terms of moisture and applying water for the upcoming needs of the particular plant. And then once it's in place, then a little bit of mulch across the top. This is probably my favorite size of mulch, just small bark chunks. You can buy this at garden centers, at hardware store. A variety of sizes and colors works really well. What this will do is it will hold moisture in the soil. And that does a good job so you don't have to go back every 3 days or so and water. You can just be looking at a situation where you come back every week to 10 days and water. Hold moisture in the soil. It'll also do a great job of suppressing any weeds that germinate yet this fall and heading up into Thanksgiving time. So it does a couple of things. And that's really very helpful for newly planted trees. You don't want to get this up against the tree trunk itself. So if this were the tree trunk, you'd want to start the mulch about 6 inches away from the trunk so that mice and other rodents don't have a chance to get up there and cause it any problems. You want to keep that away a little bit. But from a standpoint of using the mulch, about this much mulch around the tree trunk is a good idea. As well around the tree trunk. Speaking of the tree trunk, we want to make sure we protect the tree trunk. Now this is something you normally put on a drain, a downspout or something like that to direct water away from the house. But it's also a very good device to protect that newly planted tree. And what you do is you just take this and you split it with a Dremel tool or some sort of a hacksaw or something like that, to where you can just cut this, open it up enough and slip it around the tree. And you remember how I mentioned about the mice and voles and rodents and other squirrels and things like that? They can really damage a tree trunk pretty quickly. So this is really tough. This is that PVC plastic that works really well for drain tiles and for downspout extensions. Works great to keep those gnawing rodents away from the tree trunk, because they can cause an awful lot of damage. They get hungry in the wintertime. They're looking for anything green. And you don't mind so much if they eat a little bit of grass, but you sure don't want them eating your newly planted tree. All right, so those are some things you should do. Now here I'm going to show you one thing you shouldn't do on a newly planted tree. A lot of people want to do a lot of what we call TLC for plants, tender loving care, and they want to sort of over-help the plant. In that first year of planting, you don't want to put on any kind of tree fertilizer. This is something you might want to put on later if it showed some nutrient deficiency symptoms. If I had a Sharpie, I would put a big red X over the top of this, that we don't want to use something like this until we see a need for it later. And too often, people want to give the plant tender loving care. They want to nurture it kind of like they would, a child or a new puppy or something like that. And really, this is not something to be used, especially if you're fertilizing your lawn in that same adjacent area. It's already getting a little bit of overspray or a little bit of additional nutrients, so you really don't want to be doing that. So in terms of caring for a new tree, it's all about correcting mistakes that you might see with crossing limbs, broken limbs, a little bit of decay in the tree. It's about keeping the right moisture level. It's about protecting the tree trunk and avoiding any fertilization until that arises down the road sometime. So hopefully those are good suggestions that will help you care for your newly planted tree. If you have any questions about that, you can contact us at the Extension office, talk to a master gardener, and they can give you good advice along those lines as well. I'm John Fesh with Nebraska Extension.
Hi, I'm Kathleen Q with Nebraska Extension. Today we're talking about growing garlic. If you've ever grown garlic before, you know that in the springtime, when you're looking at all the garden centers, garlic is readily found. You can find it easily for planting. But what you may not know is that garlic that's grown in fall, so fall planted garlic, actually is healthier, and it actually produces bigger bulbs than it does if it's spring planted. So even though it's October, it may seem like things are wrapping up, you can actually plant garlic now and get some great garlic to enjoy next summer. When choosing a site for growing garlic, you're going to want a site that has at least 6 hours of direct, uninterrupted sunlight during the course of the day. It can be more than 6 hours, but if it's less than 6 hours, you're not going to get as good production as you'd like to have. You'll also want a site that has well-draining soil. So if it's a heavy, dense clay that you're growing it in, what bulbs will do is rot. So you'll definitely want to amend that soil with compost to really loosen things up. The other thing to keep in mind is that if you're growing in sandy soils are a little bit problematic for garlic as well, mostly because garlic is a heavy nutrient-needing plant. And so if you don't have some of that organic matter worked into it to provide those nutrients to plants, you're not going to get as good production as well. So either way, clay or sand, you're going to want to work in some organic matter like compost, leaf mold, something like that, in order to loosen that soil up to plant these guys. Now when you're choosing garlic varieties to grow, the first thing I want to remind you is don't go to the grocery store and purchase one of these for planting in the garden. The reason you don't want this is because a lot of times this product that you're purchasing has been treated with an anti-sprouting product. And that keeps it from sprouting while it's in the grocery store and while it's on your pantry shelf. But this is something that you don't want to use because it's not going to do as well. From there, we know that garlic is broadly divided into soft neck varieties and hard neck varieties. Soft neck varieties are those that we often see braided into chains, and you'll see those a lot in like the southwest part of the country. And that has a very short shelf life. So that really isn't the one that we're going to be talking about growing today. We're going to be talking about the hard neck varieties. Now, granted, you can't necessarily put those into braids, but they're called hard neck because there's a central stem through it that's really quite stiff, really quite hard. And those hard neck varieties are really, really good at being able to store them for long periods of time. So we're going to talk about mostly hard neck varieties to grow. And when you're looking at varieties, the flavor range is just phenomenal. So you can get buttery flavored garlic, you can get mild, you can get fiery. And all of those have a range of flavors that are really culinary possibilities, something that you can really get into, and it does a lot of good for your cooking skills. And when you're looking at varieties to grow, there's a plethora of types to grow out there. They can be things with really fun names. So there's Romanian white, and there's Russian red, and what are some other varieties that you can grow that all have some unique flavors associated with them, but all of them are hard neck varieties. Okay. Now, when we're talking about growing garlic, so this is a garlic head, all right? And so you're actually breaking it apart and putting in individual cloves into the soil. So the bigger the clove, the larger the head will be the result. So this is something that if you're saving these cloves from one year to the next for replanting, the temptation is there to eat all the big ones, because those are really convenient to do, and save the tiny ones for replanting next fall. The problem with that is, again, the larger the clove, the larger the head. So you'll actually want to be saving back some of the larger cloves when you plant these next fall. When you're looking at site preparation, you want to make sure the soil is very nice, very workable, very friable. And then at that point, you want to start digging your holes. And there's a lot of different ways you can do that. You can dig a trench in the ground, or you can use a dibble and do individual holes. But you'll want to plant each one of these about 4 inches deep and 6 inches apart. 6 inches apart allows individual bulbs to fully develop without competing with their neighbor. When you're planting these guys, you want the flat side down. So this is called the basal plate. This is how it comes off of the clove. So it's actually associated like this. These are all basal plates towards the bottom. And when you break those off, and this is another thing to remember, you really don't want to break the head apart until you're ready to plant. The reason for that is these papery sheaths on here help to keep the clove hydrated. It helps retain moisture levels. And so if you're breaking these apart too soon, this clove can actually shrink down some, and that's going to affect the ability of it to do well. So break these apart when you're ready to plant. The basal plate goes down to the bottom of the hole. This point that's on the end goes upward. So it faces skyward, where this goes downward. And again, 4 inches down and about 6 inches apart. Now, once those are planted, you can go ahead and put the soil back in place, water it in well, and the very first thing that this is going to do when it's set into the ground is this clove is going to put out roots. And you want it to do that because what's going to happen here is that those roots are going to further help keep this clove hydrated through the growing season, through the winter, all that time period. Now, what may happen is that you'll get some green growth yet this fall. And if you have that, That's not a concern. You don't want to remove it. You want to leave it in place. And that was actually something that will help nourish the plant through the winter months. So you can definitely leave this green growth in place. When I was looking, this is the garlic out of my garden, and when I was looking for this yesterday, my dog Boston was going out and helping me as I was in the garden, and he actually found my patch of garlic before I did, and I knew that because I could smell the garlic. And if you were in the studio right now with me, you would know that it really smells like garlic in here just from having these plants in here. So it's amazing how much fragrance that they give off when you're doing this. The other thing to keep in mind is that next year you may have a seed stalk come up out of the clump. And if you see something like that, you'll want to snap that off. The reason for that is that if the plant puts a lot of energy into developing sets from that, then it's going to take away from the bulb size. So definitely you'll want to go ahead and snap those off. The good news is that if you snap it off when it's relatively small, it's edible. And so you can actually put it in dishes where a garlic flavor is desired. Then next spring, this growth is going to resume in earnest. And the time to harvest is when this foliage dies back by 1/2. So when the foliage is dead by 1/2, then it's time to go ahead and dig up and see what kind of cloves and heads that you have in there. So remember, the largest cloves make the largest heads of garlic, that you can save some of these back for next year in order to plant again in the fall, and then you'll have more of the same things growing. As a final thing, you're going to want to go ahead and mulch these guys, okay? And what you use is entirely up to you. This is wheat straw right here, and you can see that this is a seed head from the wheat straw, and so sometimes you can see occasionally some wheat plants coming up from wheat straw, but that's a good mulch to use. Or you can use something like wood chips, and that's okay to use as well. A lot of people think that the use of mulches is to keep the ground cooler or warmer, depending on that. But really what we're doing is we're keeping things from having to go through the great vastness of temperature ranges that can occur in the Midwest. And so this is actually an insulation layer against those really wild temperature fluctuations that can occur. So that's the final step, is that mulching that you'll do with your garlic. So that in essence is how to grow it. And I hope that you find that it's really quite easy, and really there's nothing to get between you and growing garlic except getting out those garden gloves. For Nebraska Extension, I'm Kathleen Q.